You use this term reducciones. So, it's a Hispanic term, but please tell us about the reducciones, because I think you still in many small towns and places, and I am definitely that I've seen this still pretty much the influence of the reducciones is still pretty much seen.
Because you can see this in the old towns, perhaps even where we even our present towns, no, where you have the church, you have the municipio, you have the school around, you have the market, all around one plaza. There's a main plaza where the people would congregate, where they would have their celebrations, and then around the plaza you have the church, the convento, you have the school, you have the municipio, you have the the markets around there. And eventually, of course, little hospitals around there also. So that was the organization to facilitate, because the natives were scattered in the barangays, in the barrios. So this made them come down to the towns. That's why among the works of the Franciscans, they built bridges, roads, tunnels, everything to facilitate travel and commerce. Because if they now invited the people from the mountains to come down to sell their produce, to sell their whatever they harvest in a common market, then they have to have roads, they have to have bridges. And practically the Franciscans started all of those in these places where they were. And the other groups already also, because they have this common program, they would meet, the groups would meet regularly, maybe once a year or every 2 years, and they would compare their work, and they would, what is successful in the work of one group would be duplicated by the other groups, because it works. And so that was the common program. We copied from each other.
In today's management speak, you were sharing best practices.
Exactly. Could not be otherwise, because we were proclaiming the same message. It is the gospel, and therefore we cannot be divided, because the gospel unites, and we have to show the people through our unity that this is the message that we should practice.
If we were to go on a post-COVID pilgrimage to these areas, will we still see remnants, marks of your stay there?
Yes. So in the 300 years or so until the Spanish-American War, that is 1898, from 1578 to 1898, the Franciscans have founded 233 towns. 233 towns with their churches, their conventos, their schools, and some of them even with a clinic or a hospital. So the towns, of course, still exist. If you go to Laguna, all the churches are there. You mentioned Tanay. Tanay was founded by the Franciscans. Morong, all these churches around the lake, all the towns around Laguna de Bay were founded by us. And churches are there, of course. You can start from our side, from Morong, Pililla, down the line, Tanay, and around the lake, and then you come back to Los Baños and so on. And all of these have Franciscan churches that still exist, founded by them. And then you go to Bicol, the same. When you are driving through, the churches that you will find in Gumaca, in going all the way to Quezon, in Sariaya, and so forth, down, then you will find again Franciscan traces. You have seen probably the damages of Typhoon Rolly, and they showed pictures of churches that were destroyed. And immediately I said, that's ours, because of the architecture, because our churches only have one steeple, one campanario. One campanario, that is typical Franciscan architecture for the church. In the churches in Laguna, you will find only one campanario. In the Augustinians and the Dominicans, they would have usually two campanarios, two church bells, no? or steeples. Well, we already have one. And so that distinguished our churches. And you can find them all the way to Samar, Bicol, Samar, and the churches that we have founded. So they still exist.
Father, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and some of your, some of your fellow Franciscans are probably going to, they're probably going to rib you for this, but I'll ask you right now.
Yeah.
If someone were to ask you, all right, Father, we'd love to go on a tour of, we'd love to go on a historical pilgrimage on some of the old heritage towns, or some of the old Franciscan towns, let's put it that way. And we'd love to be able to see the best looking or the best preserved churches in the original areas where you were at. Where would you
Yes.
advise them to go? Per in each of the general areas that you described.
Okay. The best areas, the best preserved churches, not really best preserved, but the group that we have are the churches in Laguna and Rizal. Every year, when I was parish priest in Forbes during Lent, when we have Visita Iglesia, we would usually make a tour of these churches, visit these churches for one day. We start in the morning. We start from either from Los Baños all the way around the lake and end up on the other side of Rizal, and we make a tour. And we visit the churches in Paete, in Pakil, in Pangil, in Mahayhay, and these are churches that are very well preserved, beautifully well preserved, and they are historical churches. Magdalena, and then of course on the other side, Tanay, they have beautiful preserved Stations of the Cross that go back to Spanish times, statues, decorations, many things that can still be found from the Spanish era. And so I would suggest, even until today, they usually make tours of those churches. I'm not saying that the other churches are not good, because aside from Laguna, when I was parish priest, we would also make a tour of the churches in Cavite and Batangas, which are also beautiful. These are already some of them by the Jesuits. And then we would go also a tour of the churches Bataan and Pampanga, which are not ours. And they also have beautiful churches, because at that time, they would follow more or less the same decorations, the same structures. And since these have been preserved, for example, the church of Betis in Pampanga, and of course in other places, they are beautiful churches. They're not ours. And so when you ask about our Franciscan churches, then the recommendation is always around Laguna de Bay, around the lake. Start from Rizal or the other side and just go around. You have enough churches to see. Some of them, of course, are heritage churches, and they cannot be touched anymore. Mahayhay, Paete. Paete is particularly beautiful, but the other also, Magdalena, and so on. So
Father, I'll just stretch that area. Okay,
Okay.
so we've got Laguna de Bay already covered, that area. How about further down south? At least in the down to Quezon, and just some examples of Franciscan churches that are still around
Okay.
and worth going to, from Quezon to Bicol, and down to Samaran and Leyte, Father. If you
Okay.
can,
So
please.
in Quezon, we will have Candelaria, Quezon. Then we go to Sariaya, which is a church in honor of Saint Francis. The church in Candelaria is already in honor of San Pedro Bautista also, although it's called Candelaria. The town is Candelaria. And then you have, of course, Sariaya, the patron saint is Saint Francis of Assisi. And then you go down to Lucena. Then you go down to Pagbilao. Then you go to all the way down. All the churches are still there. But it is quite difficult to go on a tour because they go on a straight line. While around the lake, you can go around. Okay, but the churches are still there. And then you go all the way to Bicol. Of course, Naga, and Daraga, Kamalig. They were all damaged by by this typhoon Roli. And you have in Daraga, you have the Kagsawa ruins. Have you heard of that? The ruins because of the eruption of the 1800s, 1811, I believe, around that time of Mayon. And the church was completely buried, except again the campanario. The one campanario is standing. That is also a tourist spot there. And during this typhoon, that was again flooded with lahar and rocks coming from the mountain. So all the churches along the way, going south, all the way to Sorsogon, were most of them built by the Franciscans. The Legazpi, Albay. In Albay, we still have the churches of Daraga, and over the hill, precisely when Kagsawa was buried by the volcanic eruption, they built the church of Daraga in a hill facing the volcano. There is a valley between them, so that it will no longer be under the waters of Mayon in case there will be an eruption of the lahar, of the, yes. And then all the way down to Samar already. You can find many churches in Samar, Northern Samar, Calbayog, Katarman. These are all still Franciscan churches.
Any message to
Okay.
Filipino Catholics, Christians, as we count down to the Quincentennial of the First Mass in the Philippines, as we count down to 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines?
Yes. Okay, first of all, that they will not look at the Franciscans like Padre Damaso. Because when they see the Franciscans, they think of Padre Damaso. And of course, they do not think of what they have accomplished 300 years earlier. The first ones, as I mentioned, Juan de Plasencia, Pedro Bautista, Juan Oliver, Juan Clemente, and all these missionaries, Laguna, Quezon, all the way Bicol and Samar. And so they should think of it that way and treasure the traditions that have been brought by the Franciscans, by the other missionaries, to think of the other missionaries. Sometimes our focus can be so limited, so narrow, because of the media, because of the other groups that have come again. And so we lose sight of the richness of what colonization brought to us. Colonization is not a bad word. It's not a bad word. When we speak of colonization, people think of how we have suffered under Spain. But that is not all. We also received the faith. We also received Christianity. And all these things that the missionaries built, the first hospital, the roads, the churches, everything, education, that's all started by the missionaries. And so we are the fruits. And I was saying that, our instead of, I think I mentioned this in my article, instead of just proclaiming it the coming of Christianity, let us celebrate 1521 as the birthday, the birth of the Filipino nation, because it was the missionaries who brought the provinces together. They were separate, independent kingdoms when the missionaries first came. And that's why they fought among themselves. But with the arrival of the missionaries, they were brought closer together, closer together. And so it was like the birth of the Filipino nation. And that is beautiful for us because the Philippines today is really unique in the family of nations. How the Filipinos can adjust to any culture because of the many cultures that came to our lands in the course of our centuries. Not only the Spanish, but before the Spanish came, Islam, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Japanese, they all came before the Spaniards. And they contributed to our language, to our culture. And then all of these have enriched the Filipino nation so that we can so really adjust to any culture. We can learn any language so fast. Our tongue is so pliable that we can learn Japanese. Those who go to Japan, to go to Arab countries, in a matter of weeks, they can speak the language. And I have experience of this because I have been in Europe for many years. And, traveling, they speak like natives. They speak like natives. And where did they learn that? Already from the experience of being adjustable to the many cultures that came to our country. And so these things are not considered. And so if we can enlarge our own view, our own, and not be so nationalistic only to what is here, what is actually, when we talk only of what is here, that is very limited, very limited. But if you have to accept, and all other cultures, all countries in the history of the world were colonized, Rome, Greece, Egypt, Middle East, they were colonized. And from the colonization, they got the richness of what they are today. And so we have to enlarge our awareness, not think only of the negative, of the sufferings. All of those people suffered. Egypt and Greece and Rome and the Middle East and all the other countries that were colonized. They suffered in the process. But the colonization left something that enriched the original people, the original natives. So that is an aspect that sometimes we overlook or we downplay too much. But it is a connection. And that is actually the spirit of what Pope Francis is giving to the world. That we are brothers and sisters. We are one family. This is our world. This is our home. We are in here together. Do not discriminate about cultures or religions or anything. Work together to bring about peace. This is what Pope Francis in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, which is based on the words of Saint Francis. No?